Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, September 15th, 2023. If this were a month with 31 days, it would be the Ides of September, but it isn't. So, it is, however. Oh, yeah, that's right. It's Erev Rosh Hashanah this evening, I guess, or I guess today is. And that means it's the last day of, what the hell year are we in here? 5783? I don't even remember anymore. But I had it down in this morning's posts. I checked. There we go. Yeah, all right. We're moving into the last day of 5783. All right. Well, anyway, we've got work ahead of us for clearing out the docket for today. It is Friday, of course. And, let's see. We have lots of, things added to the calendar at the end of the day yesterday and the beginning of today. Yeah, where we go. Let's see. The current year, 5783. So moving on to 5784. Is that right? Okay. Just checking the Jewish calendar, which is not noted on my NAFTA refrigerator calendar for whatever reason. And, so happy New Year to all who celebrate, and happy New Year to all of you who don't know that it's the new year. It doesn't matter. You should have a happy one anyway, and B, look, the year is changing. It's not up to me. That's what the calendar says. It's not what your calendar says, but then again, something, I won the election, I don't know what. I'm going to just send fake electors, and I think that's okay now. So now I guess you can do that with the year as well. And all right, let's see, moving on, and I see I've made a mistake in the post already and got the years backwards in one of the comments that I was making. Don't worry about it. I'll go back and fix it. I don't think they're reading any of this anyway. And, I don't know. Maybe it's time to give it up. But at any rate, let's, move on to the things that I had put aside to share with you. I guess in thinking about the, anything goes mentality, I did happen to see something this morning, a short item, treated in long fashion, but we'll try and cut down on it a little bit, over at HuffPost, covering the fact, which we didn't even cover, that Donald Trump did another stupid television interview, although it is of some interest that he did it with Megyn Kelly, which you remember, she was like his public enemy number one for a short while. You know, he rotates enemies and fundraises off of it, and then when that's tapped out, he forgets that he has that person is an enemy, and it all fades and goes away. Megyn Kelly, I think during the 2016 election was when she became his big enemy. And remember, it's horrible, she's bleeding from wherever, or whatever. Was that her that she was doing that to? Anyway, it was nonsense to begin with, but I don't really care to defend Megyn Kelly in any way. But he wouldn't do the debate because she was so anti-Trump. But he will do this interview because either he's deranged and has no memory of what he had done or what he said about her in 2016, or he never cared in the first place. So whatever the backstory is to that, David Moy at HuffPost has this story under the headline of "Legal Experts Have a Field Day with Trump's Megyn Kelly Interview." The former president thought he was speaking his truth, and I guess that's the theory, right? And in his head, he believes that this is true, although no one is really sure whether that's really the case. But some thought it sounded more like a confession, and that's because everything he says is a confession, essentially. Now, the article appears lengthy, but really all it is about 4 or 5 paragraphs of decent stuff, and then embedded tweets for the rest of it. Remember, the headline, "Legal Experts Have a Field Day with Trump's Megyn Kelly Interview." It's not that David is covering a convocation of legal experts who spoke on the subject. It's rather that he has collected their tweets. And whether they're legal experts or not, I'm not sure. But, not hard to identify people who are actual legal experts on social media and who have interesting things to say. It's a perfectly legitimate genre of article. It's just not as long as it looks. So what's the story here? Donald Trump's Sirius XM interview with Megyn Kelly. That's where she has parked herself now. That's a real outlet, and they do pay for things occasionally, not everything. You may recall the earliest versions of this show were, in fact, weekly appearances for a short amount of time. I mean, it was weekly. That's how it worked out. We did it once a week, but it was like 4 weeks. So it barely qualifies as weekly. But at any rate, an experimental program, essentially, that Sirius XM invited then Daily Kos to give them free content. This is in the early days of the model of giving us free content. Or everybody giving everybody else free content, and then some people becoming billionaires with it, and the rest of us saying, I don't understand. I was supposed to be able to promote myself into millionairehood, and it didn't work. Anyway, SiriusXM knew that Daily Kos was a hot property at the time, and still is, but they were, I guess, they thought hot enough to market a show with, but not hot enough to share any revenue with, whereas SiriusXM was making some revenue. Anyway, the idea was you can self-promote somehow into prominence and riches. Come and do a radio show. Now, they're an East Coast operation. Marcos wasn't about to go and do that on the East Coast. So we got dispatched to do that because we were interested in doing something like that anyway. And I went with Armando, and we actually went into the studio together in D.C. to, I don't know how long the show was, even an hour, maybe it was more. And we just did this, essentially, but we had other people around to press the buttons and tell us when to take breaks, as opposed to me trying to figure it out myself at the same time. Anyway, so that's neither here nor there, but I think people have enjoyed, I've gotten a couple of notes in the last few days that people are enjoying hearing old-timey background stories about how it is we ended up doing this show that you're listening to every day. And that was how they did it. They come on in, do the show for free, and if you like it and it's really popular, continue doing it for free. That was a terrific business model. And it was a gigantic pain in the ass to do. It was fun, but, we had to be downtown, and not even downtown. It was in a weird, hard to reach part of DC. Like former industrial sites were the only places big enough to house the Sirius XM thing. They overhauled it. It was a nice building, what they did with it. But it was hard to get to, and we had to get there at 8 a.m. or even earlier, maybe 7 a.m. on Saturday or something, so that we could be on the air at 9 or so. It was crazy. And of course, it was nice having people, like I said, pressing the buttons and all, and having a real studio and not buying all the equipment yourself, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, there wasn't much in it for us, so we experimented, had some fun, and then took off. And now Megyn Kelly is doing the same thing, but I gather she's Megyn Kelly. They're probably paying her some money. Not, I wanted to put all that out there. That's neither here nor there with respect to this story, but it does segue into another story about what Tucker Carlson is doing these days that might be of some interest later on. Okay. So, who was I talking about? Oh, yeah, right. The guy who had, up till recently, been president of the United States, went on Megyn Kelly's maybe free radio show on SiriusXM to give an interview, saying the write-up here is Donald Trump's SiriusXM interview with Megyn Kelly, who he used to hate but now doesn't or something, probably helped her attract listeners after its release Thursday, but it may also end up helping prosecutors in his classified documents case. I don't think that Donald Trump cared to help Megyn Kelly attract listeners. It's an interesting observation that we switch perspectives. All of a sudden it's about, what does Megyn Kelly hope to get out of this interview? Well, the same thing that they try to get out of every interview, attract listeners. Okay, he's right. He's not a bad reporter. Anyway, during the discussion, the former president suggested that it is his right to hold on to the top secret materials, which are at the center of a felony indictment announced earlier this summer. Of course, the fact that, that's your opinion. You say you're allowed to hold on to them. The federal government says the opposite, and you are charged with multiple felonies as a result. No news in the sense that we know that he is that weird and dumb and likes to say, whether he believes it or not, that is his excuse. But anyway, it's just interesting to hear him say it every once in a while in his own words, and in his own voice, which we can either play for you or just imitate. Easier to just imitate it, as he said to Megyn Kelly, "I'm allowed to take these documents, classified or not classified. And frankly, when I have them," this is interesting. This is like the Nixon doctrine as applied specifically to classified material. "When I have them, they become unclassified. People think you have to go through a ritual. You don't. At least, in my opinion, you don't." I love that. It's an interesting hedge for him. He usually doesn't bother offering that. But there it is. In my opinion, you don't have to do anything to make them unclassified. They just become unclassified. I don't have to declassify them. I don't even just have to declare them declassified, or as he says, unclassified. They just become that way, just by handing me the paper, apparently, is his view. Not that that means anything. It doesn't. It's a view that you can say you have. It's one of dozens that are wrong, millions that you could probably invent that are also wrong, but that's the way it is. Trump justified his stance by pointing to the 1978 Presidential Records Act, a law enacted after the Watergate scandal, to clarify that White House documents are the property of the federal government. And, yeah, good reminder of the timing and meaning of the act. It is here he is restating the Nixon doctrine, and what he's pointing to. I mean, we've already gone through how ridiculous a thing it is for him to point to the Presidential Records Act and say that proves I had this right. That is, that I had this both correct and that I enjoyed the legal right to do this thing. When in fact it is a law designed to, well, the law is explicit in what you can and can't do, and it actually says that the things that he did are things that you can't do. But it's also just particularly interesting that he is restating the Nixon doctrine, saying when I have them, they become unclassified, and when I have them, I can do whatever I want with them, because Presidential Records Act, then keeping in mind that the Presidential Records Act was a law enacted after the Watergate scandal to clarify that White House documents are the property of the federal government and not you. You've not only misread the actual black and white, or as they say, black letter of the law. The white is the page on the background. But never leave the whiteness out of any of this. That would be a mistake. Okay, so not only wrong on the black letter law of it, what does the law say, but wrong entirely on the background and reasoning for the law as well. But, you know, when you're Trump and you're doing something wrong, you gotta go 100%. So, you can see Trump explain things away in the video clip below, and I imagine it'll sound a lot like what I just read to you, because it's the same words, but it's in his voice, and I do my level best to get close to that voice. But this is all it is. So now this is an interesting exploration of content generation all by itself. That's like really almost everything that the writer has added to the article. There is another paragraph here, which echoes the subheader. While Trump may have thought he was just speaking his truth, many legal experts suggested his statements sounded more like a confession, one that could even be played to a jury. That's the text that follows up the embedded video from the Republican Accountability account on Twitter. And then after that, the legal experts that they were talking about start weighing in. He begins by embedding the quote tweet from Bradley Moss, who identifies here as Brad Moss Esquire, and he's just quoting him. "I'm allowed to take these documents classified or unclassified. Credit to Megyn Kelly for letting him confess to the crimes of the indictment. She'll see this played at the trial by the government." And then a parade of such things. Joyce Aileen saying, "So nice when Trump does prosecutors work for them. Good confession." George Conway saying interviewers should be required to read him his rights, and then including a graphic of the Miranda warning rights. The Miranda rights warning, really. Eric Columbus, who may or may not be either an attorney or an explorer, you tell me. Congrats to Megyn Kelly on joining Bret Baier in the conservative journalists who extracted Trump confessions clubs. You get the rest of it. By the way, some other interesting observations. Eric Owens noting that in this case, the ritual that Trump refers to, that you don't have to go through a ritual. The ritual, he says, is the rule of law. Yeah. That's kind of true. What else here? When Lee Kowarski saying, when people ask me why the Manhattan DA wanted to defer filling details of the prosecution's theory, this is why. My man is going to go on TV and get his confession on. You get the idea. But it wasn't just legal professionals that had thoughts about Trump's statements, just to draw this article out a little bit more. And then he quotes a bunch of other people who had clever things to say about the very same video. And, it might not necessarily be worth going on at length about that. But there you have it. Just thought I would note for the record that he had done this interview and confessed to the crime in the same way that he's confessed to it every other time beforehand. But just, I want you to know that that happened again, because the weekend is coming and people might be talking about that. All right. Let's see. Other things that I wanted to share with you. There, a lot of it is in social media format, and I can't see what it is until I open it up because Pocket doesn't display it. So you'll have to forgive me for taking my time doing that. Yeah, you know what? Maybe that's all I can do. It's just a collection of the various things that happened across my screen this morning. That's a show solution. That's the usual show solution. But there are definitely some longer form things I wanted to read to you. This is interesting. It's not really interested in displaying blue sky, whatever they call those things, skeets. I know, sky tweet, I think is how they came to skeet, by the way. But it was from Seth Maskett making a very astute observation, distilled out of the bare facts of what was going on here, but getting it largely right. Let me see if I can call up his skeet, because he uses a screenshot to set the thing up, which I think was requires some background, but everything's really just moving super slow here for whatever reason. So I guess it's just not going to work. There we are. It's an extraordinarily popular skeet, having now been shared 664 times. And here's the reason why. He has grabbed a screen grab from the Atlantic article that Greg and I discussed yesterday of Mitt Romney. The Mitt Romney book is coming out, and the excerpts from the book upcoming, I guess, in which he says, how correct it is to blame Donald Trump for all that was going on January 6th, et cetera, and that he's not running again, and that he has always felt threatened by Trump physically certainly since January 6th, and how many members of Congress he has conversed with who said, I really wanted to vote to convict him, but I was afraid he would send his mob after me and my family, which is an incredible thing, of course, and properly the focus of a significant section of, I guess, this chapter that they took this from. And it's amazing to be reminded of all of that, and it's amazing to see people remembering it and commenting on it again and saying, how difficult could it possibly be to come to the conclusion? I mean, if you were worried, well, was this really an insurrection? If you've fallen subject to the propaganda from the Republican side trying to diminish what happened, or recast what happened as something else like just tourism or whatever. And, normal people will occasionally open up a little bit and say, well, let me consider this opposite version of what happened here and see if there's any truth at all, anything of value to be extracted from this. But, mostly they come to the conclusion that, now I'm hearing so many members of Congress really thought that they would be murdered, not necessarily on January 6th, but, murdered or their families murdered if they voted to go with their conscience and convict and remove from office Donald Trump, or even in the second impeachment after he was out of office, voting to convict him and I guess then barring him from public office, that they were afraid for the safety of their families. And how incredible is that? And obviously it is, I mean, it's the very definition of terrorism. And, you should recognize that. And that's the reason why he needed to be held accountable. But then they didn't do it. Anyway, this particular screenshot reads, and Seth is saying at first here, we're not talking about this part enough. As dismayed as Romney was by this line of thinking, he understood it. Most members of Congress don't have security details. That's true. Their addresses are publicly available online. That also is largely true, although a lot of them are fake addresses to establish quote-unquote residency in their districts, even though they don't actually live there. But it goes on, the important part here is highlighted. Romney himself had been shelling out $5,000 a day since the riot to cover private security for his family. Now, of course, he's got that kind of money and he can do that, an expense he knew most of his colleagues couldn't afford. But, and lots of people saw that and lots of people made great comments on it, but Seth really has distilled it down to the essence here in saying, and that's why it's so popular in the sharing, the 2012 GOP nominee, for the sake of lending this the weight that it requires, I'll substitute the word Republican for GOP. The 2012 Republican nominee is spending nearly $2 million a year at a clip of $5,000 a day. The 2012 Republican nominee for president, I'll add, is spending nearly $2 million a year to keep the 2016 Republican nominee from murdering him and his family. That's the tax that Donald Trump imposes on everybody and on this country, but in, each person individually. It takes a mental tax from everybody. But from Mitt Romney, the 2012 nominee, is in danger and spending $2 million a year to protect himself and his family from the death threats being issued by the very next Republican nominee. And I understand now he's taking this principled stance and everything, but in addition to having my head mentally flip back to like the Benghazi smirk and helping set up this whole situation, I also am in my head replaying that scene where he sits down to dinner with Trump. And isn't it like post-nomination or maybe even post-election where he's sort of almost, the idea was supposed to be, this is me coming to kiss the ring at a dinner and maybe court him for a cabinet position or something like that. I don't remember what the purpose of that dinner was, but he was thoroughly humiliated. And rightly so, for even attending the dinner. Anyway, I just thought that was a really amazing distillation of it, right? And it obviously occurred to him later in all of this. He was saying, and we're not talking about this part enough, but then later he was like, yeah, I mean, what this really means is exactly this. And he did the math, $2 million a year just to make sure that the current Republican standard bearer doesn't kill you. Wow. Okay. Justice, by the way, reminding me that, that was correct. Thanks for doing the production work on this one. He was, at the time, hoping to become Secretary of State for Donald Trump. I don't know how hard he was hoping, but instead the position went to, what was his name? Rex Tillerson, who, I think Trump ended up declaring Rex Tillerson a moron, and Rex Tillerson ended up declaring Donald Trump a moron. But he used to be, this is a great early example of the ETTD, everything Trump touches dies, doctrine. The guy who had been CEO of ExxonMobil, right? I mean, you can go out on a high at that point, right? Just retire. Don't do anything. Don't, burnish your legacy or whatever. Just live. Spend the oil money. on vacation forever until you die. That's what you should be doing, really, at that point. But he says, I'm going to serve my country. Then that evolved into, I'm going to protect my country from the idiot who made me Secretary of State. And then that evolved very quickly into, what the F am I doing? What was I saying I could be doing? Oh, yeah, vacationing. All right, I quit. He was out of there in like a year, Secretary of State. Anyway, Mitt Romney was there at that dinner, like, maybe you could put some of your fecal matter on this plate and I could eat it and then I would be able to be Secretary of State. I mean, that's dodging a bullet right there. Instead of dodging that, he did dodge that bullet. Now he has to duck every other bullet and spend $2 million a year doing it. Okay. I don't know. Just a little trip down memory lane, triggered by one little skeet here. And 20 minutes later, we're done with that one. Okay. Just wanted to note that one for the record. In a follow-up to something we discussed yesterday, oh dang. One MSNBC article that I put away. Oh yeah, now I remember what it was. But it's not here. The article's been deleted. So that story is gone. I wish I had taken a screenshot of that one, and I don't know. I meant to really show this one around home, but I thought it would be of some interest to the rest of you too. Where I just saw someone was passing around the other day, and someone else has a screenshot of it on social media, so I'll have to go looking for it. But an AI, maybe the worst AI generated article I've ever seen, and it was for a significant outlet, for MSN.com. I thought was amazing, and it was on the and I don't even know. I'll have to look it up. I'll look it up during the break and see if I can find it. But reporting on something in a fashion that was like, this AI, this might even be a foreign language AI. It was the English involved in the story. Like, you could tell what the story was actually about, but then when you realized that an AI, or it was real to you, that AI had written the story, you were like, it went through a thesaurus and picked, all it did was scrape the information from someone else, went through a thesaurus and picked supposed synonyms of a bunch of the big words and plugged those in instead and changed the meaning of the story entirely. I'll see if I can dig it up over the break. And if not, well, to hell with it then. We'll do something else.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Best I can do here is a couple of later entries on Blue Sky discussing the horrible story that I guess has been since eliminated from MSN's website. And I figured it wasn't long for this world. But let's see. Is there anybody who... Well, okay. I think there's an article here. From Futurism.com, I have... let's see. Here's somebody... skeeting, about it. Tiago Diaz saying, in an unhinged twist on what was otherwise a somber news story, Microsoft's MSN news portal published a garbled, seemingly AI-generated article that, well, let me just tell you what's going on here without giving it away. The story was of an NBA player, or perhaps former NBA player, who had unexpectedly died at a very young age, I think 42, 43 years old. And It was an obituary, which is really not a great thing to screw up. But it looked like the AI, and I assume it was, I don't know if they ever confessed that that's what it was, but I mean, I would blame it on that for sure, had scraped someone else's story, which is, unethical enough, and just decided we'll change some of the words, and then we'll avoid plagiarism and copyright problems. But one, they overdid it, and two, that somebody didn't review it, and three, it was, like I said, gobbledygook. And here, the subheader of this story from Futurism.com, AI should not be writing obituaries, is probably the best lesson of the whole thing. Yeah. Or the most obvious lesson of the whole thing. Microsoft publishes garbled AI article calling tragically deceased NBA player useless. That's what the thesaurus thing did to this. Like everybody else's headline was, and who are we talking about? Brandon Hunter is the former NBA player, about whom this horrible thing was written. And everybody else said, former NBA player Brandon Hunter dead at 42 or passes away at 42 or something like that, some variant of that. And the AI turned it into former NBA player Brandon Hunter rendered useless at 42. Like, that's not even a good synonym for it. It's just, and maybe the worst possible version of that story. But the whole body of the article was like that. Let me see to what extent the body of the article is covered here. Former NBA player Brandon Hunter passed away unexpectedly at the young age of 42 this week. A tragedy that rattled fans of his 2000s era, I would say, career with the Boston Celtics and Orlando Magic. Interestingly, he is depicted here playing appears to be playing in an Israeli league, which you can tell by the Hebrew on his basketball jersey. Very few other reasons to have Hebrew on your basketball jersey. Anyway, but hey, happy Rosh Hashanah, everybody. Maybe it was that. And an unhinged twist on what was otherwise a somber news story, Microsoft's MSN news portal published a garbled, seemingly AI-generated article that derided Hunter as useless in its headline. That is amazing. Brandon Hunter, useless at 42, read the article, which was quickly called out on social media. The rest of the brief report is even more incomprehensible, informing readers that Hunter, quote, handed away after achieving, quote, vital success as a head for the Bobcats, and, quote, performed in 67 video games. I mean, I'm laughing at somebody's obituary, but it's incredible how badly this was done, and that this is something they unleashed to just say, it's doing fine. Write articles. Did it get worse along the way? Like, it's actually doing pretty good. And then, hey, we stopped supervising it and it went bananas. I don't know. Condemnation for the disrespectful article was swift and forceful. AI should not be writing obituaries, posted one reader. Pay your damn writers, MSN. That's another good point. The most dystopian part of this is that AI, which replaces us, will be as obtuse and stupid as this translation, wrote a Redditor. But for the money man, it's enough. It's not the first time, it says here, Microsoft, the major backer of ChatGPT maker OpenAI, has embarrassed itself with AI-generated content on MSN. It made headlines last month, for instance, after publishing a similarly incoherent AI-generated travel guide for Ottawa, Canada, that bizarrely recommended that tourists visit a local food bank. That is pretty wacky. It deleted the bizarre article after criticism. The article was not published by an unsupervised AI, Jeff Jones, a senior director at Microsoft, claimed to The Verge at the time. In this case, the content was generated through a combination of algorithmic techniques with human review, not a large language model or AI system. So it wasn't a bad AI system that did it. It was an algorithmic technique with human review that sucked horribly that did it. No human review, obviously, was going on. The full story is that back in 2020, MSN fired the team of human journalists, 2020, wow, responsible for vetting content published on its platform. As a result, as we reported last year, the platform ended up syndicating large numbers of sloppy articles about topics as dubious as Bigfoot and mermaids, which it deleted after we pointed them out, in Futurism, I guess. You might expect that these repeated self-inflicted embarrassments would lead MSN to increase its scrutiny of content shared with its vast audience. I guess not. We are working to ensure this type of content isn't posted in the future, Jones told The Verge last month. Probably you read that as, if you read that, as we're hiring somebody to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore. And the answer actually is, well, we are working to ensure this type of content isn't posted in the future. The work that we're doing is hoping that it's not and firing whoever's still around if it is. That's not really working to ensure it isn't posted in the future, but it is working to ensure that somebody else will pay the price if it is. Well, they don't seem to be succeeding. MSNBC, or MSN rather, promises on its About Us page that it ensures the content we show aligns with our values through human oversight. But looking at some of the material published on its site, that claim strains credibility. I guess it doesn't go on to quote much more of the article in question, but I guess some other similar examples. But I really, look around for it. You'll find some screenshots, I'm sure, of this stuff. But as you can see, the rest of the article is gobbledygook, and identifies Brandon Hunter, a participant in many basketball games. Like even, that's true. I don't know about the video game thing. Maybe he modeled, as one of the players in like a, EA Sports NBA thing or something. Is that what they meant? I don't know. But certainly you wouldn't find English-speaking humans referring to a former NBA player as a participant in several basketball games. Let's just say that. Anyway, take the, just to conclude here, go back to Futurism. Take the original publisher of the piece on Hunter's death, a publication going by the name of Racetrack. Red flags abound, starting with the fact that its articles are bylined simply by an anonymous editor. The publication claims to distill, quote, the essence of sports excellence by being, quote, your premier destination for all major sports news. Not good, but inoffensive. And though it links to a Portuguese language automotive magazine called Auto Gear in its MSN profile, that site's About Us page is entirely filled with lorem ipsum text, placeholder verbiage, of course, commonly used by web designers. Over the last 12 hours, the website has seemingly been taken down and presents visitors with a login page instead. And despite having almost 100,000 followers on Facebook, this site's content gets almost zero engagement there. Most obviously, a quick perusal of Racetrack's profile shows that it has been using MSN to publish an uninterrupted stream of incoherent gobbledygook. One particularly ridiculous article profiles a corridor of fame football player. Don't say Hall of Fame, they'll catch us for plagiarism. Corridor of Fame football player called Pleasure Taylor, which appears to be a mangled reference to Hall of Famer Joy Taylor. Wow. Actually, it's less like AI and more like the old joke of taking an article that's decent and reasonably written, or any passage, and putting it through Google Translate, turning it into Russian, grabbing it, and then retranslating it, maybe translating into another language and then back into English, just for the joke of seeing how badly mangled it comes out in the end. Another unintelligible recent piece slapped together by Racetrack and republished by MSN bungled the story of Kevin Porter Jr.'s arrest for domestic violence, misstating facts as basic as the name of NYU Langone Medical Center, which it referred to as Langone Medical Heart. The center of the medical care is the heart of the medical system, I guess. So there you go. Upon closer examination, the articles aren't just abysmally low quality. As it turns out, they're also plagiarized. That seems obvious. Take the article about Hunter's death, which follows the same structure as a TMZ sports story about his death, albeit with altered punctuation and a use of synonyms so liberal that the result is essentially incomprehensible. Here's the first line of TMZ's write-up. Former Boston Celtics and Orlando Magic player Brandon Hunter has died. Ohio men's basketball coach Jeff Bowles said on Tuesday he was just 42 years old. I don't know if I'm pronouncing Jeff Bowles' name correctly, but he's not the focus of the story. Now compare that to the first line of MSN's version, which clearly performed a series of clunky rephrasings like changing player to participant to disguise the pilfering. And it reads, former NBA participant Brandon Hunter, who beforehand performed for the Boston Celtics and Orlando Magic, has handed away on the age of 42 as introduced by Ohio males basketball coach Jeff Bowles on Tuesday. I'm surprised they didn't just say the second day of the work week. I mean, wow. By the way, most of the people whose obituaries are running, you can assume that the accomplishments they're discussing happened beforehand. That's true. Wow. Former Boston Celtics and Orlando Magic player. Former NBA participant Brandon Hunter, who beforehand performed for the Celtics and Magic. Incredible. And then the next two paragraphs of TMZ's story, the one probably written by a human being, or at least reviewed by one. Hunter, a standout high school hoops player in Cincinnati. You can already see that the machine's going to have trouble with this. Was a star forward for the Bobcats, earning 3 first-team All-MAC conference selections and leading the NCAA in rebounding his senior season before being taken with the 56th overall pick in the 2003 NBA draft. He played 67 games over 2 seasons in the association, scoring a career-high 17 points against the Milwaukee Bucks in 2004. Coherent if you have any understanding of sports and American sports lingo. To be honest, the rest of the world, even though they do play basketball, probably reads a lot of that like I would read the report of a cricket match. Just like, that's what it says, and I'm sure it makes sense to somebody. But yeah, asking a machine to then process that and steal it without being caught, running it through the plagiarization machine, that's going to be horrible. So on review, the version published by MSN is obviously a chopped up remix and reads this way. Hunter, initially a extremely regarded high school basketball participant in Cincinnati, achieved vital success as a head, like a forward, for the Bobcats. He earned 3 first-team All-MAC convention alternatives and led the NCAA in rebounding throughout his senior season. Hunter's expertise led to his choice because the 56th general decide within the 2003 NBA draft. Now, if you told me it was cricket, I'd just say, I don't understand the terminology, but that's what it says. But it's basketball, so I can tell that ain't right. Everywhere we looked, other racetrack articles on MSN are clearly ripped off from other publishers. The Pleasure Taylor item is evidently a mangled version of a blog by The Cold Wire, whatever that might be. A story about potholes in the UK is a butchered version of a piece in Autocar. And a post about tennis star Novak Djokovic is lifted from Tennis World. We reached out to MSN with questions but haven't heard back. Or maybe you did and you just didn't understand that those words were meant to be answering you. Racetracks articles, including the one about Hunter, are still live. Needless to say, none of this bodes well for the information ecosystem. With publications eagerly looking to replace human editors and writers, AI has unleashed a barrage of dubiously sourced content, sometimes by mainstream news sites ranging from CNET to the AV Club, that threatens to further erode public trust in the media. Accusing an NBA legend of being useless the week he died isn't just an offensive slip-up by a seemingly unsupervised algorithm. In other words, it's also a threat looming over the future of journalism. Wow. So, that wouldn't ordinarily make our news roundup, but hey, it's Friday, and I thought, you might find that story interesting. Now, I was going to say, before I went to this one, that there was a follow-up to a story I had read to you earlier in the week, probably. Was it yesterday? Maybe. And this is in keeping with the AI theme. I think it was yesterday that we mentioned that, where was it? In which state were they working on this? Maybe it was just nationally they were working on it, but I guess Georgia. Oh, yes, right. Cleta Mitchell was involved. The use of, or the introduction of this EagleAI tool, allegedly a tool to be used by Republican activists to generate mass challenges to voter registrations, which is a tactic they've already been using without AI, and just basically taking their best shot at naming every black person in the state and challenging their registration, not based on anything in particular, but just saying, I hereby challenge the registration of this person, and leaving it to the registrars in the various counties to decide on what basis would that challenge be made, and is it valid, and why are you challenging the registration of every black person in the county. But the twist on it was, I mean, in Georgia, the Republican Party already does this and was already gearing up to do it again, worse, in 2024. We started yesterday with the article by Mark Elias pointing out that they were doing this. And now I wanted to add this additional take to it from the Brennan Center, which addresses this issue and makes an important additional point. A new anti-democracy tool is the name of the piece. EagleAI is the latest effort by election deniers to use the upkeep of voter rolls as a vehicle to disenfranchise voters and spread disinformation. Alice Clapman and Andrew Garber launching into this subject. The big takeaway here is that there's no actual, well, certainly no evidence that any actual AI is in use here, right? Like, we thought the big evolution was, it used to be that back in the days when it was really an actual thing, you had official challengers, people named and identified and vetted and officially named to this role by the various campaigns as challengers. You could go to the polls and supervise that day and say if you thought someone was being given a ballot that shouldn't be, you could lodge a complaint. And then the Georgia Republican legislature very recently sort of expanded things so that now you don't have to be an official challenger. Anybody can challenge, and they can challenge not on election day, but well ahead of election day. And they don't have to have any particular basis for making the challenge. And that just opened the door to give me a list of every black person in the county, and I will challenge their registration. Some of them will win on, and some of them we won't. But if we start by challenging every black person in the county, for Republicans, that's a good place to be. If we accidentally actually are able to validly strike somebody from the voter rolls, so much the better for us. But why don't we just start with everybody? And again, people with no legal standing to do this were handling it because the official people were too damn busy disenfranchising other people for other reasons. So they just opened it up to vigilante challengers. And then, even more lazy, they said, well, I'm too busy to do this. Why don't you take care of it? The people who were then handed the assignment of taking care of it say, how can I make a computer do all of this instead? And then it got to be a massive thing. Well, now I just will use a computer to compile a list of every black person in the county and challenge all of those things. So now we're caught out. We have people have seen this coming, and they've called it out, and some sensible people will read the article or hear about it on the radio and say this is an outrage. What are we going to do? And I guess their best idea was, why don't we use the AI craze as cover? I mean, using a computer to sort through the voter rolls and just separating out all the black people and then challenging all of them is a fairly, it's horrible, but it's a fairly routine use of computing power. There's no real reason that you need AI to do it. But AI being the craze and the I standing for intelligence, I think they were thinking, well, if we call our product EagleAI, two things will happen. One, people will think we're using AI to do this and might give it a pass because, well, intelligence, computers, they don't get things wrong. It's just, whatever. Even though, how frequently are those same people complaining, this damn computer screwed up and told me I wasn't eligible for my medical coverage, and I am, but the computer did it. Anyway, two things will happen. One, people will make the assumption that AI is actually in use, and two, people will assume that maybe they're right because, computers, artificial intelligence. But as it turns out, there's no AI involved. It's really just a cover story. So here's the write-up from the Brennan Center. Some of the nation's preeminent election deniers have launched EagleAI Network, a new project that could undermine voting rights and elections. Its key supporters include Georgia's serial voting registration challenger Jason Frazier and former President Trump lawyer Cleta Mitchell. Cleta effing Mitchell, as she's known on this show, best known for her participation in Trump's phone call asking Georgia's Secretary of State to find him 11,780 votes. There's that number. If EagleAI replaces existing election systems, as that's what they're actually hoping to do, they'll say, we're going to sell our EagleAI thing, whatever it is, to individual counties, and you should run all the registrations through it, and it will automatically, it's programmed to intelligently tell you which people should be removed from the rolls. Well, inside the black box is remove all black people from this list. But if you're not allowed to examine that because it's proprietary, then maybe it will take more than an election cycle or two for you to legally expel us from this job. And in the meantime, we will have solidified our hold on the legislature and will undo the legal expulsion of us from this job. So a Wisconsin Supreme Court impeachment type scheme going on here. If EagleAI replaces existing election systems, it may be used to smear impartial election administration, disenfranchise voters, and set the stage for overturning unfavorable election results. It's another link in the anti-democracy chain that those unhappy with election outcomes are building. Don't let the AI in the name fool you. There is nothing intelligent about EagleAI, which appears to be no more than a system that performs data matches based on a database of public voter data amassed by a web scraper. And you've seen what they are able to do with obituaries. Surely they could handle this intricate work, right? Its own proponents describe it as Excel on steroids. That is, the steroids that make Excel come to a conclusion that would get you arrested if you did it yourself as a human being, but instead you can say it wasn't me, it was the computer artificially, intelligently doing this work. I don't know why it picked all the blah people. EagleAI takes its sources, including the National Change of Address database, takes from sources, including the National Change of Address database, criminal justice records, and tax property data to create massive lists of voters. From there, it highlights names of potentially ineligible voters using criteria that are at best unreliable and at worst irrelevant, such as matching names on voter lists with change of address forms or felony convictions, or even just registrations at nursing homes, baselessly implying that nursing home residents are somehow not competent to vote. Amateur investigators take the highlighted names and look for purported evidence of voter ineligibility, like a social media posting from out of state. They can use EagleAI to auto-prepare challenge forms in a couple of clicks. It's no more than a clearinghouse for election deniers to compile mass challenges. And I don't even know why they bother looking for evidence, but that was an interesting bit of evidence I never heard used. They posted on social media from a different state. Therefore, they live in that state, as opposed to they were driving through it or visiting it or who knows what. Or the metadata is just set incorrectly. Could be anything. Anyway, the problem explained here with mass voter challenges, just in case you missed yesterday's discussion of it. Election officials across the country update their voter rolls and remove ineligible voters as a routine part of their jobs. In fact, they're required to do so by federal law. Most states also allow private citizens now to challenge registrants on or before Election Day. Ideally, these challenges should only be filed by those with personal knowledge of a change in the voter's eligibility, such as the neighbor of a registered voter who has since moved. Challenges by private citizens add almost no value over the proven technology used by election administrators. Mostly they just disrupt election administration and potentially disenfranchise voters. But that's what they're after. The battleground state of Georgia has been at the epicenter of private challenges since the 2020 election, with one group challenging 364,000 voters before the January 2021 Senate runoffs. In 2021, Georgia expanded its already permissive challenger laws, and in 2022, a small group of activists contested over 90,000 registrations. County boards rejected almost all of these challenges. I'm glad they're at least doing their job correctly. But for how long? And how long can they hold out? And for how long will they not face recall by local Republicans who want to replace them with people who will accept all of the challenges? As I said yesterday, the fact that the legislature, Republican-dominated legislature, was already in 2021 getting ready to expand the eligibility of private citizens to do these things with no basis whatsoever is probably the reason that Trump, accompanied by Cleta effing Mitchell, who's in the middle of this whole project. Why does Cleta Mitchell tell Trump that he can get on the phone and do this? Why does Cleta Mitchell agree to participate in this call? Why do any of them have any expectation that if they call the Secretary of State of Georgia and tell him, I just need you to find 11,780 votes, a completely off-the-wall demand to make of any Secretary of State anywhere, why did they think the Secretary of State of Georgia might actually be amenable to that? It turns out he wasn't. Glad he wasn't. Don't know if that makes him a good guy or not, but he wasn't amenable to doing it. But why do Trump and specifically Cleta effing Mitchell, think they'll get a good reception this way? And the answer is the rest of the Republican Party in Georgia is amenable to this. They're passing a new law to enable it. Why is Brad Raffensperger out here on his own, out of position with the rest of the Republican Party in Georgia? That's the big mystery. Cleta Mitchell clearly expects a different answer here because every time she's asked the question in Georgia, she's gotten a different answer. And the answer was, yes, we should be doing this. Absolutely. We're working hard on it as we speak. Cleta Mitchell, I submit to you, was caught by surprise by not getting the answer she wanted from Brad Raffensperger in that call. How she's remained unindicted at this point is another big mystery. But there you go. There's more to it, and perhaps I'll give a glance through the rest of the article in our 1-minute break coming up here to see whether it's worth continuing and uncovering more details or whether we wander on to some other esoterica for the weekend. It's, of course, not esoterica to you. You're here for this. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I don't know, in 1 minute I was able to glance at this thing. I feel compelled to continue on with this. And I think it helps reiterate the point from yesterday about Cleta Mitchell's complicity in all of this. And I'd like to talk to the Fulton County grand jury a little bit more about this one. But anyway, the battleground of Georgia, of course, as they pointed out here, has been at the epicenter of expanding the use of the private challenges. And their results, having challenged in one case 364,000 voters and then another 90,000 on top of that, hardly a surprise, as they write here at the Brennan Center, because as we've documented, mass challengers are consistently based on unreliable data. And remember, previous stories about this stuff have usually been like, well, here's a guy named Steve Jones who moved out of the state, so he shouldn't be registered here. And so we're going to challenge everybody in the state named Steve Jones, even if it's obviously a different person, different age, different address, different date of registration, everything. But the name says Steve Jones. And what about people who are Stevie Jones? Well, them too. We're going to get rid of those as well. And here's somebody who spelled their name incorrectly, obviously. This person's name is Stanley Jones, but we think they meant Steve Jones, and you should be eliminated too. I mean, it's garbage, and they do it on purpose. Anyway, as they write here, specifically, inconsistencies in voter data can more often be explained by benign reasons rather than voter ineligibility. To name a few, voters may want their mail forwarded, but remain eligible to vote at their registered address. People may accidentally indicate an entire household moved when some members remained. Public property records may be out of date, and people often share names. Yes. Thus, private challenges based on these data sets are more likely to sweep in eligible voters than to identify ineligible voters. In other words, not only is the error rate high, it's more likely that the names on the list are there in error than that they are correct. There are more quote-unquote mistakes being made than actual problems being identified. But then again, that's by design. And even if it doesn't result in having them all thrown off the ballot, it will. Sometimes it just forces people to cast provisional ballots, but then they work to challenge all provisional ballots on the day of election. Don't count provisional ballots because reasons. And in some counties that works, and in some counties they say, no, you're going to need proof as to why I shouldn't count this provisional ballot. But to the extent that it works in some counties, great, and in an election that's close, whether it's 11,870 votes or 500 and something votes, every disqualification helps. So they just do it and see what happens. At best, mass private challenges are redundant. Federal law requires states and localities to maintain accurate voter rolls while placing limitations on when they may remove voters. When private challengers step in, they often ignore these limitations and pressure local boards to do the same. The rules say you can't do this purge now during this particular period, but I urge you to ignore that and do it anyway. And then when you get sued, see you later. But please do it anyway, and please use your majority on the board to just excuse yourself from prosecution, or try to fire the prosecutor who brings charges against you, or defund the office of the prosecutor that brings charges against you, or pardon yourself, or any of the other things that are available to impeach people from the Supreme Court if they uphold your conviction. You see what's going on here. At worst, even when rejected, mass challenges have dangerous downstream effects. Local boards must dedicate their limited resources to investigating them and may send out notices to eligible voters, which may intimidate them out of voting. Challenges also fuel election misinformation by creating the false appearance of many questionable registrations, right? I mean, that's just building your own fake evidence, right? Cleta Mitchell can, let's say she was indicted in some of this, right? What were you doing trying to get 11,870 votes found, or 11,870 votes for the other people eliminated from the count? Well, I was just asking questions. You see, after all, almost 365,000 people, it turns out, might be illegally registered in Georgia. Where do you get that number from? Well, that number comes from the 364,000 challenges you filed. You were the source for that number. And that number was pulled out of thin air because that's how many challenges you were able to generate before the deadline passed. My computer is only that fast. If I had had two computers doing it, I would have been here claiming 1 million people are illegally registered in this state. But I only had one, so the answer is 360. You can't file 364,000 charges and then show up and say, what evidence do I have of fraud? I happen to have heard somewhere that up to 364,000 people might be illegally registered. That was the number you claimed had problems with their registration. We checked into it, and there were 4 out of the 364,000 or whatever that you filed that were actually problematic, and it turned out 3 of them were mistakes. But in the meantime, it's on the record in front of the Georgia State Legislature that, 500,000 people could be illegally registered. But that's a number you made up. You can't do that. Well, you can. You can. And largely, you'll get away with it. So, the same activists responsible for pushing these mass challenges in Georgia and elsewhere are now doubling down on their flawed scheme with EagleAI. The creation of EagleAI seems to be part of a larger plan to move away from responsible voter list maintenance. This is in a new section entitled Undermining Responsible Election Administration. This, too, is a goal for all of this. If there's no such thing as official responsible election administration, then what the hell? Let anybody do it. And this conspiracy nut here next door says, I have a theory under which all black people should be eliminated from the voting rolls. Why? They're being controlled by Jewish space lasers. Well, that sounds dumb, but if you can get 5 votes on the county election board, or 3 votes, whatever you need to have a majority, and they say, I believe the Jewish space laser theory, and I eliminate them, you'll sue. There'll be a big legal fight, but what usually ends up happening is, well, it's too close to an election for us to do anything about it. We're just going to have to go to the polls with the voter lists we have, which have been purged on the Jewish space laser theory, and you can sue later. Fantastic. That's no solution. Though, so where were we? The creation of EagleAI seems to be part of a larger plan to move away from responsible voter list maintenance. For over a decade, officials in many states have used the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC, to maintain accurate voter rolls and encourage voter registration. But I'll point out here in a short diversion, but to draw an analogy, in an era when it's okay for you to have your own personal ideas about the medical science behind the efficacy of a COVID vaccine, let's say, or the possible health side effects, if any, of said vaccine, if that's all okay and everybody can make up their own mind and everybody's a doctor and everybody's a HIPAA administrator as well, and making their own determinations. Hell, why not do it with the voter rolls? Hell, why not do it with electoral votes? You know what? Go ahead. You want to be an elector? Make yourself a certificate. You're an elector. Just put it out there into the universe and see if somebody accepts it. And if they don't, well, free speech. All I was doing was writing something down. Why are you arresting me? All I was doing was writing down Federal Reserve note on this piece of paper. I don't understand what your problem is, right? And by the way, this theory is expandable. We can use it everywhere. Not only writing your own Federal Reserve notes, but maybe you don't like the way the Supreme Court is working these days. Maybe you are a Supreme Court justice. Maybe you were nominated to the Supreme Court and, I don't know, the Senate lost your paperwork or didn't lose your paperwork, because I just found it right here on my computer printer. I've been appointed to the Supreme Court. I was confirmed, along with 650 of my best friends. And these are our alternative rulings on the following cases. And we send them to the Supreme Court reporter and ask that they be published. And, you know, if some people choose to believe them and regard them as real, that's fine. Whether it's the Vice President of the United States, the President of the United States, the rest of the federal judiciary, if they decide that my reports are as valid as anybody else, what can I do? The determination has been made. It's in their hands. Sounds crazy, but then so does fake electoral voting certificates. Seems to me like we could put a stop to all of this craziness. We could either jump into the abyss and say, everybody can be everything. Everybody generate your own certificates. Don't worry about it. The most popular ones will win. Or we can say, no, when these official documents get forged, we'll arrest the people who forged them and the conspirators who told them to do the forging. That would be my theory. That tends to be the one that, I mean, up to now, we always thought that was the way it would work. But, you know, as you know, we could be pretty wrong about that. Anyway, back to Eric and responsible election administration, and away from the irresponsible election administration from other angles that I was just describing. So, where were we? Everybody used to use Eric, and at its height, 33 states plus Washington, D.C. participated. So not everybody, but a significant portion. Securely combining confidential DMV and voter registration information from member states, along with federal Social Security and Postal Service databases, ERIC uses sophisticated AI, actual AI, assisted matching technology to identify voters who have moved or died. I don't know what the AI has to do with it, or whether it's really just, is this name and that name the same? How about their addresses? Yes? Oh, a death certificate? Okay. That gets flagged as a match. I don't know if that's AI or just computers. Anyway, by using confidential data, it creates far fewer false matches than other methods and produces a better list of potentially eligible voters for states to contact. Not by virtue of the data having been confidential, but rather that it was more detailed. And the fact that it's more detailed information is what keeps it, why it's confidential. But okay, their machines, their system, ERIC, has much better and more detailed information that helps it avoid false matches. Eric has drawn widespread praise from both Republican and Democratic election officials. It's a triumph of professional and competent election administration, so obviously it has to be killed. Starting in 2022, right-wing election deniers, with Cleta effing Mitchell's help, led a relentless disinformation campaign pressuring states to exit the compact. 9 Republican-run states have left, including many that previously trumpeted Eric as a godsend for, quote, godsend for list accuracy and fraud prevention. And by the way, just to remind you why we keep saying Cleta effing Mitchell versus just Cleta Mitchell. I don't know what her middle name is. I don't know if it's F. It doesn't matter. But for us, she's Cleta effing Mitchell, so that you'll remember that we started calling her that when we were reading the story a few days ago about Ginny Thomas's Leonard Leo and Harlan Crow funded expedition into Republican activism after her husband had secured his spot on the Supreme Court. But post like 2010, this was the import of the whole article, post Citizens United. The Citizens United decision, aided and assented to and helped along the way by Clarence Thomas, opened up this whole world of unaccountable dark money to pay for projects that you would be too embarrassed to allow to see the funding sources see the light of day. And upon realizing that this was going to happen, even before the Citizens United decision was handed down, somehow, some strange unknown mechanism, Ginny Thomas, the wife of a then sitting Supreme Court justice, got early wind of the fact that pretty soon, via the Citizens United decision, there was going to be a whole world of dark money opened up to people bold enough to grab it with both hands and do their various tasks with it. For good or for evil, anybody could do it. It just happened that all the money was on the evil side. But pretty soon that was going to be available. It wasn't yet, but soon it was going to be. Now remember, the Supreme Court likes to hold its cards close, right? We don't leak this kind of information because who knows what sort of mischief could be afoot if we were to give certain people insider information tips, the sort of thing that would get you arrested in the securities exchange context. And then suddenly, Ginny Thomas, just, regular person who just loved meddling in politics for whatever reason, contacted a lawyer and said, I want you to help me file the paperwork for a new kind of organization that will run on funding that is currently illegal, but I have this weird feeling will suddenly become legal very soon. I would like you to help me organize the paperwork for this. And that lawyer was Cleta effing Mitchell. And the organizations they founded were dedicated to projects like this one, helping us legalize in the various states the private vigilante voter registration challenges using computer-aided technology to do it on a massive scale. This will cost some money. The people who would ordinarily like to fund this would like to be able to fund it without anybody finding out that they are racist bigots trying to suppress black and brown voters at the behest of the Republican Party. So is there some way we can do it in secret? Sorry, no. Post-Watergate laws, like the Presidential Records Act from 1978, there were good reasons for these post-Watergate laws, all of them passed in reaction to things Nixon had already done and that Republicans were mad they couldn't do anymore. We need to re-legalize these things. So what I'd like you to do, Cleta effing Mitchell, is file the paperwork so that as soon as this Supreme Court decision is handed down, which I have a hunch that it's going to come out this way. And I want to be the first one out of the box so that I can grab up the most money when it does happen. And then I'm going to use it to re-perpetrate the crimes prohibited by post-Watergate legislation. Only this time they'll be legal, I think, because my husband's on the Supreme Court and he's going to help me legalize them. You see? All right. this now begins to make a certain amount of sense. And by the way, one of the things I skipped mentioning in the night when we were mentioning the Presidential Records Act, and the suite of post-Watergate litigation, not litigation, well, litigation too, but legislation that supposedly banned most of this behavior so that we wouldn't go through Watergate again. Our long national nightmare would actually be over. The lifetime project of Dick Cheney was to relitigate Watergate. That's why litigation was on my mind. And in other words, to reverse the effect of all of this post-Watergate restriction on the Republican Party, because this was their bread and butter. They wanted out of the post-Watergate understanding that most of this stuff is, always should have been, and from now on would be illegal. Let's reverse it. How do we do it? Well, if we can't convince everybody of the propriety of it, perhaps we could convince 5 Supreme Court justices of the propriety, or at least the lucrativeness of it. And will they do it for us then? And the ultimate irony being that that leopard came and ate the face of Dick Cheney's children, and Liz Cheney made her, presumably, political swan song, fighting the outer limits, against the outer limits of the natural conclusion of her father's lifetime agenda. Anything goes, and it's okay if you're a Republican. So, I don't know. I find that all rather ironic. But to return to the story here, and the more organized thoughts of the Brennan Center, while officials abandoned their best tool to maintain accurate rolls, Eric, EagleAI's founders were working behind the scenes to pitch it as a replacement for Eric. Why don't you all get out of the godsend stuff, and if you need a computer to help you do things because you learned that that was in fact the godsend, use our computer instead. Hugo Chavez didn't design it. Jewish space lasers did. Here, use this. We mentioned yesterday, another of the amazing ironies in all of this is that they are complaining that Dominion voting system and Smartmatic and the various other voting machine and voting tabulation machine manufacturers are illegally facilitating massive elections fraud. And their answer to that is, usually they say, well, we need paper ballots and we need verifiable, yada, yada, yada. And then they realized they were getting nowhere with that one. Mostly, or at least partially, because it's just logistically impossible to count that many ballots and to do it quickly. But in the meantime, if you can't, we'll just use the fact that it takes a long time to allege fraud. But even better would be, what if we programmed our own machines to do the cheating that we think the other side is using in their machines, but aren't, even though we keep stealing the machines and copying their hard drives. We just we keep not finding the information about how they fix the elections because the Jewish space lasers are erasing those drives when we remove them. It's a big cover up, you see. So our best bet is to replace their machines with our machines. Let's put our cheat codes in the machines and convince people to take them. And if logic won't work because people are afraid of machines and unaccountable programming, then we'll just put enough Republicans on those boards that they can be convinced to make the decision on a not logical basis. But because Republican people say so, they'll vote to do so as well. And why would that be persuasive to them? Oh, that brings us back to the story of threatening to murder Republican or Democratic, for that matter, elected officials if they don't do it your way. That seems to be working on a local level as well. So, for whatever strange reason, officials who abandoned Eric were buying up EagleAI instead. Many officials have rejected EagleAI's approaches, but some county officials in states including Georgia, weird, Florida, I would never have guessed, Maryland, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Texas are reportedly discussing contracting with it. The problem is imminent enough that at least one state official, former Georgia State Board of Elections Chair William Duffy — it's weird that Georgia is the hotbed of resistance to this. It really is. sent a letter to one county board discouraging it from using EagleAI and noting it may violate privacy laws. EagleAI is not only an unacceptable substitute for Eric, it appears to be an effort to empower election-denying ideologues by replacing a reliable list maintenance system with a patchwork of sloppy mass challenges. Next up, a new election denial long con. The movement to pull out of Eric and promote vigilante alternatives like EagleAI poses several dangers. First, as explained above, EagleAI appears to rely on publicly available data, which doesn't contain enough identifying details to confidently match individuals, but does contain enough information to threaten both targeted individuals and people encompassed by mistakes that are being made. Anyway, Eric solves this problem by securely using confidential data that matches or identifies matches more precisely. EagleAI also mirrors the Georgia challengers' flawed approach of relying on problematic evidence. As Georgia elections director Blake Evans told reporters, EagleAI data offers zero additional value to Georgia's existing list maintenance procedures. EagleAI presentations are confused and seem to steer counties toward improper list maintenance activities. Second, and so again, just to put a finer point on this one, all of the data that EagleAI uses is already available to Eric. It's just that Eric's system uses additional data that helps filter out the mistakes of the broad publicly available open source information. So there's no benefit. There literally is zero benefit to using EagleAI instead. All of the input to EagleAI is already available in Eric. It's just that it's improved by having additional information, which EagleAI leaves out. So there's just nothing added here by EagleAI. In fact, it's worse. Second, if it replaces Eric, EagleAI would transfer much of the responsibility for maintaining accurate voter rolls from professional officials to private activists. No problem there, right? This is an especially risky prospect given that EagleAI lacks Eric's voter protections. Instead of correcting for false positives using proven methods, EagleAI depends on users to conduct their own research on flagged names. So it's basically the equivalent of asking Fast Track and MSN to sort through voter records and tell us which participants in the selection of local dog catcher and other elected offices should be rendered useless on the voter rolls. You get the idea? All right. So EagleAI depends on users to conduct their own research on flagged names. And if they conduct none, then great. I mean, and why would anybody conduct any research? Because if you conduct research and you eliminate people from the list to challenge, then that's a lower number. So that when you go to the Georgia State Legislature and allege fraud, why would you want to allege a lower number of supposedly fraudulent registrations instead of a higher one? No incentive to do so. Yet we know challengers often submit unverified data, even though that's their responsibility. EagleAI leaves it to live humans to do the sorting. They just don't. Take Gwinnett County, Georgia. Its elections personnel examined a list of 37,000 challenged names and didn't find a single ineligible voter among them. 37,000 challenges, 0 successes. EagleAI will force resource-strapped local boards to spend hundreds of precious hours investigating speculation. And it's not even really genuinely informed speculation. It's a list of all the black people in the county. That's all it is. Third, EagleAI's backers also propose that local governments use it to resolve private challenges, which would lead to disastrous registration purges. This scheme is right out of the election denial playbook. Since there's no evidence that illegal voting is a widespread problem, conspiracy theorists create the facade of a problem and then demand that governments use their solution. Never mind the side effects of disenfranchisement and intimidation. They want to be prosecutor and jury. And we explained earlier, the bigger your list, the more fraud you can claim is happening. And you point at what's your evidence of fraud? the submission of a large list. Who submitted that large list? You did. That's not actually valid. But even better, suppose you submit 350,000 names on a list, complain to the legislature that there's widespread fraud as evidenced by the large list that was just submitted by some hero activists. And then you say, I'll tell you what, a good way to verify who's cheating and who's not is to buy the list of EagleAI, this incredible company that's formed recently to take care of just such problems. And if you use our list and check it against this mystery list that was submitted, you'll find that instead of 0 hits, you get 100% hits. That means that it's the most efficient. You see? It's way more efficient than Eric. Eric used to find that 1% of the submitted list was actually in need of purging from the voter rolls. Our version here will tell you that 100% of the people. So how much time is being wasted by these local boards? 0% of their time is being wasted because every minute they spend on this task results in someone being thrown off the voter rolls. Success. Terrific. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I got more. I do, I swear. More things to share actually from this article. We're going to continue on because this is obviously, for me, a very exciting platform from which to, wildly speculate about the various people who, for whatever reason, were named as prospective co-conspirators by the Fulton County grand jury, but somehow got away with it. And maybe if they just did a little bit more reading about what Cleta Mitchell is up to and the kind of person she is, maybe they would change the minds of the actual charging grand jury, or Fani Willis at some point herself might go back with the suggestion, you know what, we should re-examine what Cleta Mitchell was up to. Okay, so where were we after explaining the very dangerous scenario emerging from all this, and depending on the Brennan Center to do so. Where did we get? Oh, yeah, right. This is where we left off here. Next up, purges aren't the only concern in this scenario, by the way. EagleAI is another mechanism for drumming up bogus evidence. Yes, okay, we've talked about that. But we were expanding on our own thoughts about that. Drumming up bogus evidence that election deniers can use as, quote, proof for the lie that mass fraud mars our elections. Just by taking EagleAI seriously, local officials could give it a veneer of legitimacy that helps disinformation gain traction in the future. The lack of evidence of widespread fraud in our elections has always been an insurmountable obstacle for election deniers, to this point anyway, I would say. Since they cannot find any real evidence, despite trying very hard, they turn to smoke and mirrors. Director Evans summed up the problem. EagleAI draws inaccurate conclusions and then presents them as if they are evidence of wrongdoing. EagleAI's role as a piece of the right-wing strategy to undermine elections and Americans' confidence in them is further evidenced by its supporters. Since the 2020 election, Cleta effing Mitchell has led efforts to make it harder to vote, funneled money to Arizona's deeply flawed post-election, I would say, quote, audit, and trained a, quote, volunteer army of citizens, volunteer army, wow, to pressure election officials in some strange way and surveil polling places. Now, Mitchell is providing legal, fundraising, and strategic assistance to EagleAI, the activist network she runs, has been staffing its in-state operations and conducting outreach to election officials. Fulton County, amazingly enough, Board of Elections nominee Jason Frazier personally and baselessly challenged thousands of voters last year, leading the Fulton County Commission to reject his nomination. He is now consulting on EagleAI's platform design. States and localities should reject EagleAI wholesale. They should deny any challenges it generates, but they should do more than that to prevent EagleAI and the election denial movement from taking hold. State officials should bar local officials from using EagleAI, and states that have left ERIC should rejoin. States should tighten private challenger laws to require one-by-one challenges based on personal knowledge and to penalize frivolous challenges. Finally, all public officials must forcefully denounce the election denial that gives rise to schemes like EagleAI. It's time to let professional election administrators get back to doing their jobs. Of course, the people on the other side say, no, it isn't. And so both sides, there you go. That's all there is to it. Here's an interesting, another article that gets pointed to here by no relation to me, Michael Waldman, back no, it's not that long ago. I'm sorry. September 8th, 2003, under I guess a more specific look at it. EagleAI, it says, isn't so intelligent, but that much we've learned. But right up in the top grab of the text from thing, it notes once again the role of Cleta effing Mitchell. Former Trump lawyer Cleta effing Mitchell's bogus voter verification system is an attack on elections. I think, though, that point was largely made here, even though Michael Waldman didn't participate in the drafting of this article, though he is a Brennan Center fellow of one kind or another. Anyway, there's more of the same. And with good reason, it's actually quite scary. So, by the way, I guess in a somewhat related story, something else that I had parked here that I thought I might share with you. And if you thought, like, for instance, oh, maybe we have a chance to nip this in the bud and root out Cleta effing Mitchell's role here, or even Ginny Thomas's role in all of this, or whatever it is. If we just expose it, and turn people onto it, well, you have to try that. You have no other option but to try and educate people about this and raise awareness that this is happening. But since my job here is to send you into the weekend, hopeless that there could ever be any improvement ever in anything, I'll share this story with you. From the Morning Digest over at Daily Kos, from the Daily Kos elections team, on Wednesday today. This headline grabbed my attention, and I thought I would share the story with you. Morning Digest, Republican linked to massive election fraud scandal. What? Mounts comeback. Yeah, there's a comeback from all of this. And once I tell you who it is, you'll say, holy crap. Well, first I'll tell you who it is, and you'll say who, and then I'll remind you who that person is and what the context is. And you'll say, I can't believe. Yeah. Anyway, as they style it here, they give us the what congressional district are we talking about here? First of all, what state? North Carolina. What district? Because that's the way they deal with these things. North Carolina's 8th district. Ring any bell? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know what's going on. Republican Mark Harris. Does that ring a bell? Not. There's other Mark Harrises out there. Yeah, not the guy that used to be on the Howard Stern show all the time that married Martha Ray, right? That's the bell that gets ring. But no, Republican Mark Harris. Which one? the one whose 2018 House campaign was responsible for one of the most ignominious election fraud scandals in recent memory. Do you remember it at all? Announced on Tuesday that he's waging a comeback bid for North Carolina's now open 8th Congressional District. Harris, an ultra-conservative pastor, managed to oust Representative Robert Pittenger in the primary for the old 9th District, but despite the area's conservative lean, he faced a strong challenge in the general election from Marine veteran Dan McCready. It appeared that Harris managed to survive that year's blue wave by fewer than 1,000 votes. But in a shocking development, the state's bipartisan Board of Elections unanimously refused to certify the results amid allegations of fraud. Do you remember this story? Because it's linked here. But I have already forgotten the details of it. But this was I can't even remember exactly what happened, except now the name rings a bell. And, this controversy was entirely contained within the Republican primary for that seat, where someone was, what were they doing? They were like collecting, it was ballot harvesting, right? And some private consultant was going around supposedly saying, oh, you can fill out your absentee ballots and give them to me and I'll turn them in for you. And then they just weren't turning them in. Wasn't that the story? Well, anyway, let's see. In the following weeks, it emerged that McCrae Dowless, a consultant for Pittenger, had run a scheme to illegally collect blank or incomplete absentee ballots in rural black counties. North Carolina prohibits third-party ballot collection, by the way, then filled them out and returned them to the election offices with forged signatures. I mean, as straight up an election fraud as there could possibly be. I mean, right in the middle of Republicans screaming, Democrats are doing this, because every Republican accusation is a confession. Right in the middle of all this screaming about voter fraud, you have Republican operatives collecting black rural voters' unfilled out ballots and just filling them out in their name and submitting them as votes. Wow. Okay. With the number of potentially tainted ballots far larger than Harris's ostensible margin of victory, the Elections Board eventually threw out the results of the race, which is amazing. Except, I guess, it was as between two Republicans. Had it been between a Republican and a Democrat, maybe they don't throw out those ballots, and ordered a do-over election. Dowless, along with half a dozen other co-conspirators, was later indicted on a variety of felony counts, but died last year while awaiting trial. I mean, I would like to have seen a trial, but okay, he's dead. Harris, by contrast, was never charged with wrongdoing. It just happened to him, you see. But his fellow Republicans knew he was toxic. The GOP-run legislature quickly passed a bill changing state law to allow for a new primary rather than require the same candidates for both parties to run again. That allowed Republicans to replace Harris with State Senator Dan Bishop, the author of North Carolina's notorious bathroom bill, who defeated McCready by a tight 51-49 margin in a special election held 10 months after the original contest. Republicans, in other words, paid no electoral price for the fraudulent scheme designed to benefit their party. It was an interesting play, though. They changed the law so that they could dump the guy who had benefited from the cheating. The problem there was it'll be embarrassing because Republicans vote that tribally. They're just going to end up electing the guy who conducted all of this voter fraud. So let's put a different person in there so that we can vote tribally without being embarrassed. And they did, and it worked. But now the guy who was too embarrassing to be allowed to run is back and might win himself election. Now that Bishop is running for state attorney general, the guy they plugged in at the last minute to stand in for Harris, now that he's running for state attorney general, Harris has the chance for a do-over of his own. But he doesn't seem to want to let the past remain there. In a statement accompanying his kickoff, he claimed to be a victim of a manufactured scandal perpetrated by Jewish space lasers, no doubt, but also Democrats. It's the Democrats did this. Not me, not my operatives. And he even rehired the same campaign manager from his 2018 effort. He also seems aware that some Republicans may not be so happy to see him again, saying he, quote, fully expects to see a flurry of lies and rumors from both Democrats and from some in my own party. As of now, though, he's the only candidate in the race. And with Republicans slated to re-gerrymander North Carolina's map, if he wins next year's primary, he's exceedingly likely to finally make it to Congress after all. I guess there's just no downside. He must have seen George Santos and said, what the hell am I doing sitting on my hands? Why don't I just try to go back to Congress? I can do it in a gerrymandered 8th district, no doubt. You say Republicans are embarrassed to be seen with me. So what? They were embarrassed to be seen with George Santos. Is he there collecting a salary? Yes? I will too. Okay, so there's a little moment of hopelessness for you. There's just no stopping these idiots, as it turns out. All right. Well, there's a couple other things I wanted to share with you, including, I don't know, this, we have room usually for at least one Amanda Marcotte piece. I thought I would read this one. Oh, you know what? Maybe here's something I need to do to set this up. Do I have time for this one? I'll give you this brief as a follow-up to the story we read last week, maybe, about the various abuses being perpetrated on and by the Florida school voucher program. You remember the school voucher program that dropped basically all of the requirements that anybody justify anything whatsoever about the way they were spending the money, and parents were asking, can I use the school vouchers to buy a television, a 55-inch large screen TV for my house because a kid might watch an educational video on it? All right, but next time don't bother telling us that, the excuse, he might watch an educational video. We don't actually care. The new law says we don't actually care. You're a homeschooler. Maybe you're not. Maybe you have no kids. I don't know. But you got the voucher. Go ahead and do it. You want to use it for an $800 Lego set? Yes, that also is a yes. Well, it turns out that system sucks, and it sucks worse and on different fronts than, in addition to the ones we heard about before. This from the Florida Policy Institute, which you can find at floridapolicy.org. A statement from the Florida Policy Institute on universal voucher program data. They have found a different problem with all of this. Yesterday, FPI, in partnership with 30 education advocates, nonprofits, faith-based groups, and others, called on the Florida Department of Education, or FLDOE, to be transparent about the sustainability of the education budget for scholarships and provide data on students who'd been awarded scholarships under the state's new universal voucher program. This means not only sharing current enrollment data, but also publicly addressing current trends in scholarship awards and corresponding cost projections in relation to available funding. The bottom line in this one, it turns out, as we continue to analyze the data provided by Step Up for Students, you remember that organization that was taking over essentially it had been outsourced to them, the administration of this program. As we continue to analyze the data that they provide, what initially stands out to us is that roughly 7 in 10 new scholarship awards, the vouchers, are going to students already enrolled in private school at what FPI estimates is a $676 million cost to the state. In other words, they were saying, we're going to launch a new program to give vouchers to students whose parents want them to go to private school because public school is terrible because we're wrecking it or whatever. But they've been programmed to say, but public school is so terrible, we want our kids to get the private school education, but we can't afford it. And, gee whiz, that's a crisis of mobility here. That's a crisis of equity. And just because you're poor, this is the theory behind it on the Republican side. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you should be locked into an inferior education. I think I really would normally agree with that. That's them trying to bring you into their circle. So we solve the problem by saying we will give you vouchers so that you can, if you want, give your child the advantage that rich people are able to give their kids by sending them to private school. And then interestingly, they adopt another thing that isn't all that unpopular on the progressive side. Let's just stop means testing everything. Give everybody the money and make it available to them. And if you find that they're abusing the system, you claw it back afterwards. Except let's get rid of the clawing back part. Because as it turns out, 7 in 10 of the vouchers issued were being given to people who obviously didn't have a problem finding the money to send their kids to private schools because they were already doing it. That is pretty amazing all by itself. And then, of course, the price tag of all that. Well, how much is this costing us? $676 million. I mean, gosh, that's an awful lot. And as it turns out, I saw in passing somewhere an estimate for by how much that was exceeding all of the estimates that the Republican advocates of this program had told the Florida state legislature it could possibly cost. So, yeah, here we are. This is more than triple the initial estimate by the Florida House. So the Florida legislature was figuring on, one, we'll be giving money to people who can't afford to make it to private school in order to help them bridge that equity gap. And two, it'll cost about, $200 million. Well, no, it's going to cost more than $600 million, and 70% of the program will be spent on people who were already in private school. And then, of course, they point and say, look, according to the data we have, we've given out X number. I don't think they identify the number of scholarships, just the value of the scholarships, and that 70% of them are going to, so I don't know what the numbers are, but they point to the numbers. Look at how many of these scholarships we're giving out. Here's something that says, according to the newly shared data, 53,828 of the new enrollees, that's 44% of them, are from families making over 400% of the federal poverty level, or $120,000 for a family of 4. So that's interesting too. 44% are from households taking in over $120,000. Less in need, I would say, of that help. But that represents 44% of the program, just under 50%, which means they're giving out about 100,000 of these scholarships. And they're pointing to that and saying, our program is so popular, 100,000 people are making the exodus from public schools. Once we make it possible to do by giving out the scholarships, 100,000 people are choosing just now in the pilot year of this thing to abandon the private schools and go to the public, or abandon the public schools and go to the private schools. This is a mass movement. Parents' rights. They want the flexibility to be able to do this. But as it turns out, 70% of those 100,000, so about 70,000 of those families that we're pointing to as making a mass exodus, were already out. So basically, tell me something. How many people are enrolled in private school? 1 million. Aha! There's 1 million people marching out of the public school system and into the private school system once we've implemented our program. No, your program had nothing to do with it. They were already there. You're just paying them to give you the evidence you say you want in order to, quote unquote, prove that you're right. So, I don't know. For me, interesting story about the manufacture of more evidence. But, it's not the worst thing that they're manufacturing, honestly. That's the segue I'll use to read something from Amanda Marcotte, even though I have about 5 different things that she has on offer. Let me open up the full article, but let me also look at her social media posting about it, where she distilled it down to the main idea that grabbed my eye here, which is here she's taking a look in this piece at one video from PraegerU. You remember the Prager University, PraegerU as they call themselves online, the premier provider of fake propaganda materials that get disguised as educational materials. And you, if you find an idiot somewhere, you can sell it to their system. And they found one in Florida. The guys doing this are dumb enough to buy this stuff. I take a look at one video from PraegerU's quote-unquote history series and how they use distorted history in order to, among other things, subtly justify January 6th. of all things. People often say how we understand the past affects the present, but few give examples. Here's one, and a scary one at that. I thought I would share it with you. And then she explains ahead of time, why read this 2-minute article? I hope it's 2 minutes. Past the headlines. You have already seen all the overview reports about how bad and dangerous PraegerU is and how it's going to be forced, or how it is being forced into schools. But this brief piece shows how insidious that is by focusing on one video in particular. Here we go. PraegerU's Confederate classroom propaganda, co-opting history to prop up modern insurrectionists. Abraham Lincoln is portrayed making arguments in this video, I guess thanks to AI, that sound like modern Proud Boys begging a judge for forgiveness, Amanda tells us. And we'll close out with this one. It's ironic that the team at PraegerU hates communism so much since they produce dishonest agitprop that rivals anything the Soviet Union's most shameless propagandists ever produced. The, quote, curriculum, a word that really overrates what's now being used as educational materials in public schools in Florida and Oklahoma, is so overloaded with right-wing lies that debunking them is nearly possible. Nearly impossible. Oh, I'm losing my mind in reading this thing. So overloaded with right-wing lies that debunking them all is nearly impossible. So many hats off to the team at Media Matters for combing through the extensive video library of the non-accredited right-wing disinformation mill run by Rush Limbaugh wannabe Dennis Prager. Just like out there, people are out there like Cleta effing Mitchell selling fake AI programs as the answer to, well, you need something to help you with voter lists now that we've convinced you to leave Eric. Just here we have Dennis Prager setting himself up as, well, you want to exit the actual accredited public education system, but you find that when you exit, you're like, oh yeah, I don't actually have a curriculum. Buy ours. It's awesome. And here it goes. The cartoon videos aimed at children, which are also being considered for classrooms in Texas and New Hampshire, promote a wide-ranging amount of BS meant to poison children against reality. In other words, indoctrination in our schools, which is, of course, one of the Republican accusations we make, which is now actually a confession. Videos that lie about climate change, glamorize genocide, fearmonger about urban life, and deny human rights abuses around the globe. There's even a video in which an American bigot compares being criticized online to the plight of Soviet dissidents thrown in a gulag. It's all terrible, but I want to pull on one thread that especially illustrates why it is that conservatives are so obsessed with rewriting the past. It's not just that their snowflake delegate egos can't stand the idea that their white ancestors may have done bad things. It's because lies about history are so useful for justifying ongoing lies about our present day. In this case, there's an important connection between the lost cause mythology embedded in PraegerU videos and the attempts to whitewash Donald Trump's attempted coup that led to the insurrection of January 6th. The lost cause refers, of course, to a now multi-century effort of Confederate apologists to erase and distort the history of American slavery and the Civil War. The lies that fuel it have changed over time and place, but the basic false narratives have stayed the same. Slavery wasn't so bad. The Civil War was no big deal. And Southern racism was exaggerated. PraegerU creators are smart enough to know that they can't get away with some of the dumber lies pushed by Confederate apologists, such as claiming that the North started the war. But the basic false premise of the lost cause is all over their videos. They portray the Civil War, which killed 1 out of every 40 Americans, like a minor political disagreement between good buddies. And there is, in fact, a great screenshot of the cartoon version of it. And it is a cartoon depiction here of, well, the surrender of Appomattox, among other things. Interesting. The videos also embrace the slavery was no biggie attitude of Confederate apologists. They even show Frederick Douglass, a famous abolitionist, making excuses for slavery by claiming it was, quote, a compromise to achieve something great. In reality, of course, Douglass gave a speech in 1852 in which he declared, "Your shouts of liberty and equality are a hollow mockery and a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages." Well, that's different. There are more appalling examples. Indeed, you get the impression that they would teach Gone with the Wind as if it were a history textbook, except PraegerU isn't super keen on asking kids to read. An especially insidious video portrays President Abraham Lincoln taking a forgive and forget approach to the South. How interesting. And there it is. You can see the picture. It is exactly as ridiculous as you would imagine. No doubt PraegerU would claim it was just a coincidence, but this video came out in February of 2023. Trump had announced that he was running for president again, and even though he really should be ineligible under post-Civil War anti-insurrection constitutional law, the Oath Keepers had already been convicted, and the Proud Boys beginning their trial on charges of seditious conspiracy for their role in the Capitol riot. The country's debate over how to deal with our current crop of racist insurrectionists had really started heating up at the time that the video was released. At this precise moment in time, PraegerU put out a video misleadingly portraying Lincoln as an anti-accountability figure. The fake, quote, Lincoln in this video, frankly, sounded quite a bit like the Proud Boys begging for forgiveness at their sentencing hearings. That's pretty amazing. Conservatives are usually the first to say that you shouldn't commit the crime if you can't do the time. But apparently they make a big exception for efforts to topple American democracy for the cause of white supremacy. It's no coincidence that a number of insurrectionists waved Confederate flags on January 6th. As political scientist Anthony DiMaggio explained at Salon, white supremacist politics were a significant factor in the January 6th insurrection, just as preserving white supremacy was a reason for the Civil War. There's a direct line built on white supremacy between the Confederates then and Trump's insurrectionist army now. Another important tie between the Confederates and current MAGA movement is the fear and loathing of black voters. Trump's entire big lie tapped into racist assumptions about who is and who isn't a, quote, legitimate citizen. He repeatedly labeled voters in cities with large black populations as frauds, unsubtly tapping into white resentment over having to share power with black people. Notably, John Wilkes Booth decided to assassinate Lincoln, yes, after hearing the wartime president give a speech affirming support for black suffrage. PraegerU put this unsubtle, let's just forget this ever happened message into the mouth of a man literally murdered by the same forces they're making excuses for. It's pretty incredible. And when you see the cartoon figures selling this stuff, well, you'll just about lose your mind. But don't lose it too much, because Justice Putnam wants to come up next and warp it a little bit too. Stay tuned.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Yeah, lots to think about for the weekend. But first, revisiting the Romney story. Of course, maybe the reason Romney didn't get a response when he warned McConnell about the dangers to all of their lives on January 6th is because Mitch froze. That's true. Greg threw that one out as a possibility. Justice will be exploring it next. That and more from around the country and around the world. Next. See you next week.